So, friends, welcome to this sixth bi-weekly academic interactive session for the students. The topic for today's session is drafting, reading, and appearances. We have with us CS Simranjeet Singh. I would like to read his brief profile for you. Simranjeet Singh ji is an associate member of ICSI. He has graduated from University of Delhi as one of the top scorers during his college education. His extracurricular activities help him stay ahead of the crowd. He has cleared all his CS executive and CS professional groups in a very first attempt with flying colors. Beside this, he has qualified LLM, LLB, MCOM, and pursuing PhD in law. He is very active with various professional institutes and has addressed a number of seminars on law and is a visiting faculty of ICSI, ICMAI, Delhi University, IP University. He is an author of many books, blogs, and articles on law. He has developed a unique teaching style for which he has been awarded as best faculty several times at various institutes. He is a motivator and a corporate trainer. He has addressed various motivational seminars in school, college, and companies. Apart from this, he is working as a company secretary with India Pipe Manufacturer Association, which is a representative body of top 7 pipe manufacturing companies of the country. So the floor is now open for the questions. I would be requesting, sir. I'll be asking question one by one, and sir is requested to answer those questions. So, sir, with your permission, shall we start?
Yes, sir. Please. Is my screen visible? Am I sharing the screen?
Sir, we can see your screen, but we are not able to see the presentation. Yes, now the presentation has come, and I am going to ask you the first question. Okay, sir?
Yes, sir.
So, the first question we have received from the students is, sir, what are the essential clauses that are required to be covered in the questions in which only drafting of agreements is asked? Please, sir.
Yes, thank you. See, in this type of questions, we have to take care of few things that all the elements of drafting must be covered. So there are basically 7 main, essential elements of drafting. I will request all the participants who are attending this seminar, they can also take screenshots of these, PPTs. That will be helpful for them for future reference. Okay. So as I was telling you that there were 7 main elements in any drafting of any agreement. So we have to take care of all these 7 agreement elements. First is the description of the deed, then the place and date of the deed, then the recitals, then testatum, consideration, testimonium clause, and operative clause. So these are the 7 elements which are to be taken care while drafting an element. But now one by one, I will be explaining what are these, and then we will be telling through a practical example. I will be sharing a deed so that student can able to understand it more clearly. Now, first of all, let me just tell you what is the description of the deed. Description of the deed defines the deed. What is the deed all about? So for an example, deed could be for the purpose of sale, for the purpose of mortgage, for the purpose of lease. So all the deeds must describe, first of all, it must describe that what the deed is all about. Fine. So all deeds as such must describe by the name of the transaction to which it relates, so that it will be easy to be taken reference later on. Then the description of the deed must be expressed in the beginning of the document itself. That means while starting the document, you have to mention that what kind of deed it is. Is it a mortgage deed? Is it a sale deed? Is it a contract? What is it? So you have to mention it. Let me just give you an example. For an example, this deed of sale, this deed of mortgage, or this deed of lease. So the deed must start with this type of words. Another is the place and date. The place and date should also be very clearly mentioned. Now, what is the purpose of mentioning the date? See, the date is very much required so that to, uh, I mean, just to get the information that by when the parties has entered into a contract and what is the exact date upon which the obligation is created upon the party, and what is the purpose of writing the place. The purpose of writing the place in the agreement is that for the purpose of filing the suit, because if we have entered into an agreement in Haryana, so we will be filing suit in that particular area if it is related to immovable property. If it is related to movable property, then wherever the movable property is situated, the suit will be filed there only. So the place of the agreement is also very essential for the purpose of filing the suit. So we must clearly mention the name of the place and the date on which it is executed or to be given. And date ought to be given in words as well as in figures, so that there should be no risk of forgery and it could be avoided. And for an example, this deed of sale is made at, now here you have to write down the place, and on you have to write down the date. So date and place is also very essential in an agreement. So this is the second essential element while drafting an agreement. The third essential element is recital. What is a recital? See, recital means the short story of the agreement, that what this agreement is all about. Like we have, preface in all the books. While reading a book, we just write the preface. So preface give us an impression that what this book is all about. Similarly, we have recital in our contracts, in our agreements. These recital tells about the entire contract. So while drafting recital, very caution should be taken care of, because this is giving the impression about the contract. So recital should be inserted with great caution, because the proceeds of the operative part and a matter of fact contain the explanation of the operative part of the deed. So these are basically the summary. We can also say they are the summary. No. Then we have recital contain the short story of the property up to its resting into the transfer order, and care should be taken that the recitals are short and intelligible. They start with whereas and whereas. So if there is only one recital, you will write whereas. If there are more than one recital, so first you will write whereas, and after that you will write and whereas and whereas and whereas. So this is how we used to write recitals. I will show you an example also, a live example. Then we have testatum. Now, what is testatum? Testatum means body of the agreement. Body means terms and condition of agreement. So all the terms and condition must be given in testatum. So testatum is witnessing clause, which refer to introductory recital of the agreement, if any, and it states the consideration, if any, recites acknowledgement of its receipt. And witnessing clause usually begins with the word now this deed witness as, and if there is more than one terms and condition, in that case we have to write now this deed witness as entered. So there you can put so many points. Fine. Finally, we have consideration. See, consideration is a very essential element of any agreement, because consideration decides the stamp duty of a contract. So it must be clearly mentioned, and the true and fair amount of the consideration must be mentioned. So consideration must be expressed and the amount must be mentioned in words. As per Section 27 of Indian Stamp Act 1899, it provides that consideration should be fully and truly set forth in the deed. Why? Because it decides the stamp, the value of the stamp to be levied upon the agreement. So because in absence of mention of consideration, the evidentiary value of the document is reduced, that the document may not be adequately stamped and would attract penalty under Indian Stamp Act. So for an example, it should be mentioned that the vendor hereby sells the property bearing number this absolutely to the transferee for consideration of rupees 10 lakh. So 10 lakh in figures as well. and in words as well. So consideration is also very important. And finally, we have testimonium clause. Now, what is testimonium clause? Testimonium clause means signing of the agreement, and it is to be witnessed by some person, two person. So testimonium is the clause, the last part of the deed. And testimonium signifies that parties to the document have signed the deed, and testimonium clause marked because of the deed as it is essential part of the deed. In India, except in the case of companies and corporations, seals are not used. And in those cases, testimonium clause readers are under. In witness, whereof the parties here to sign this deed on the date first above written. So, except companies and corporates, because in companies and corporates, they cannot sign, where in that case, common seal is affixed on the documents, and this clause is not written. Otherwise, this clause is written in all the deeds. There is one more thing in the document, in the agreement, which is very important, and that is the operative clause. Now, what is the operative clause? Operative clause expresses the nature of the transaction between the parties, and that this agreement will operate when and between whose parties. So, the words of operative clause means, for an example, if we are, making a mortgage deed, in that case, we will say transferred by way of simple mortgage. So, it will tell the operative clause that what kind of agreement is it? It is a simple mortgage. Let us just take an example. And I will tell you that how it is taken care of. So, for an example, this is a mortgage deed in front of you. So, first of all, this deed of mortgage, that means what is it? It is description of the deed, no? The title. Then it is made on 3rd July 2020. 3rd July 2020 means between A and B. That means it is place and date. Then we have recitals. Recital means whereas the mortgager is absolutely seized and possessed of or otherwise is well and sufficiently entitled, the property indebted to be here by mortgage, which is free from all encumbrance and attachment. And whereas the mortgager has and whereas the mortgagee has agreed to lend and advance the sum of rupees so and so to mortgager at his request upon having the repayment thereof with interest at the rate herein understated and secured in manner hereinafter expressed. So these are the recitals. These are the summary of this entire deal. And then we have testatum. Testatum means the body. That what is deed is all about. These are the terms and conditions which has been mentioned here. Then we have consideration. That what is the consideration of the deed? Accordingly, the stamp duty will be paid on it. Finally, we have testimonium clause. In witness whereof the parties herein have set their hands on the day and year herein above mentioned. So witness, name of the witness, and mortgager and mortgagee, all of them will sign it. And another thing is the operative clause, that mortgage has deposit, the mortgager has deposited with mortgagee the original title deed. That means what kind of mortgage it is. It is a usufructuary mortgage, which is created by depositing the papers of the property. So this is how we have to answer a question where when we are writing deeds. So we have to take care of all these elements should be there while drafting an agreement. Is it clear, everyone? Can we move, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So moving to the second questions, what students have asked.
Yes.
Just give me a second. So they have asked, please explain the key points for attempting the question of drafting of writ petition.
See, first of all, we have to understand what is a writ petition. Writ petition is writ is basically an extraordinary remedy which has been granted to the citizens and where in fact there is no remedy available, or the remedy available is not adequate. That means we can only exercise this power when we have already exhausted all the remedies which are available to a party. That means if a remedy is already available to a party in any way, so first of all, he has to exercise that remedy. After exercising that, still if he hasn't got the remedy, in that case, he can go to writ. Now, it is very also essential to understand that writ can be exercised under Supreme Court Article 32 and High Court Article 226. There are basically 5 types of writs: writ of habeas corpus, writ of mandamus, writ of prohibition, writ of certiorari, and writ of quo warranto. Now, what is habeas corpus? See, writ of habeas corpus means to have a body. So, for an example, if a person has been confined by any person or in any judicial custody without any justification, without any legal justification, in that case, that person or any other person on his behalf can exercise this writ. He can go to High Court under Article 226 or Article 32 to Supreme Court. So he can ask the court to release that person because that person has been arbitrarily confined, has been confined without any justification. So habeas corpus can be the applicant, may be prisoner himself, if he is moving to the court. He has not yet moved to the court. Or any other person may move to court on his behalf. See, if he is to be confined, in that case, he himself can go and ask for the remedy. But if he has already been confined, he cannot go in that case because he has already been in the judicial custody. So in that case, somebody else on his behalf can go to the Supreme Court or High Court and exercise this writ. Another is writ of mandamus. What is mandamus? Mandamus means order. So mandamus basically means when there is a important duty of any public authority to be done, and that public authority is not doing that duty, that mandatory duty. In that case, any person whose fundamental rights are affected can move to Supreme Court under Article 32, and any other person can move to High Court under Article 226 and can ask that, sir, this public authority has not done his duty. And in that case, High Court and Supreme Court can compel, or it can give an order to that public authority to do that particular duty. So mandamus, we have to take care of that. Mandamus does not lies against the President of India, Governor of the state, for exercise of their duties and power, and a private individual or body, except where the state is in the collusion with such private party in the matter and contravention of any provision of the constitution or of the statute. See, all these remedies are available against the state, so you cannot take these remedies against any private individual. Fine. So if there is a mandatory duty of any private person, so you have to file a case against that person. You cannot file writ against that person. So these are only against the public authorities and not private person. Then we have writ of prohibition. Writ of prohibition means when we have any case, we have filed a suit in a court which is not competent to entertain that particular suit, and still that court is entertaining that particular matter. In that case, any person can move to High Court and Supreme Court under Article 32 and 226 and can ask for transferring the matter to the court which is competent to entertain that matter. So if an uncompetent court is entertaining a matter, this writ of prohibition is issued by Supreme Court or High Court. If an inferior court preventing the letter from usurping jurisdiction, that means it does not have the jurisdiction to solve the matter, and in that case, the court can compel to act within its jurisdiction. That means it can ask that particular court to move the matter to the competent court and do not decide this matter on its own. So it is a direction which is given to judicial and quasi-judicial authority. The writ of certiorari. See, there is a difference between prohibition and certiorari. And what is it? In prohibition, that what matter is pending in the court. But in certiorari, the matter has been decided by an incompetent court. So when a matter is already decided by an incompetent court, in that case, any person can go to High Court and Supreme Court. And in that case, High Court and Supreme Court will ask the inferior court to set aside the decision because it does not have power to decide that particular decision. So it will ask such authority to quash the decision. Quash means to set aside or to cancel the decision given by that particular court. And then we have writ of quo warranto. Writ of quo warranto means a writ which has been filed by a person who finds that any person is holding an office who do not have any authority to hold such office. In that case, he can file a writ and he can ask that what is your authority, by what authority you are holding such public office. And in that case, if that person is not eligible to hold such public office, he has to leave that particular, vacate that particular public office. So these are 5 types of writs which can be filed. Now, other than these, if any fundamental rights of a person can be infringed, a person can file a writ under Article 32 and can take the remedy. Let me just show you that how a writ is filed. So in a writ petition, either it will be filed to the High Court or to the Supreme Court. So first of all, you have to write in the High Court of the place and where the civil origin, the extraordinary jurisdiction, civil writ petition number, there the number will become. In the matter of, say, now this is the, imaginary matter in which what we have decided is that a person has been suspended from his office without any reasonable justification. So he is asking for the remedy, these fundamental rights. So XYZ Limited, a company wholly owned by the government of the India and having its registered office at so and so, and the managing director of the above company. Now, who is the petitioner and who is the respondent? So petitioner is this person who is a resident of so and so, and respondent is this company. That means this person is filing suit against this company, writ against this company. The civil writ petition against the order dated so and so passed by the managing director, respondent number 2, wherein by which the service of the petitioner as an employee of the respondent company has been terminated. So a person has been terminated from a government company. So in that case, he has filed a writ against that company in High Court. So now this is the body of the writ, and finally you have to tell the terms and conditions of the writ, the grounds upon which you have to take this writ, and what is your prayer. Now, what is the prayer? In the facts of the circumstances stated above, the petitioner prayed that a direction in form of a writ of mandamus, which is a mandatory duty to do a particular act and they are not doing, or any other appropriate writ to be issued quashing the impugned order and reinstating the petitioner in service. So this is a writ of mandamus. This is how we have to file a writ, and here petitioner will sign and the name of the person who will be filing. And this writ must be supported by an affidavit where he will state that every fact which has been told in the writ are true and best to my knowledge, and in future if it is found any false or misleading, in that case he will be held personally responsible for that particular act. So in this way we have to write question which is relating to writs. Fine. Questions? Up to you.
Yes, sir. Sorry for the delay. The next question we have is, please explain the difference between drafting, conveyance, and pleadings.
See, drafting and conveyance has a direct difference among them, but pleading is altogether a different thing. But still, I have explained this. Otherwise, we will be explaining pleading in very detail in question number 17. Fine. But still, what is difference between drafting and conveyance? See, drafting is a very generic term. Drafting means drafting of any agreement, draft any deed, any conveyance. But conveyance is it has very narrow meaning. It is only confined to drafting of an instrument which is transferring either the movable property or immovable property or any right. So whenever anything is transferred from one person to another, we say it is conveyance, like in case of sale, like in case of mortgage, like in case of gift. So in gift also the property is transferred from one person to another. In sale also the property is transferred from one person to another. So we will say that this is a conveyance. So conveyance is a type of instrument. It is a type of agreement. So drafting is defined as a synthesis of law and fact in a language form. So what we have done, what is in our mind, we have just put it in writing. That is what is known as drafting. But as per section 2, subsection clause 10 of Indian Stamp Act 1899, conveyance include conveyance on sale, every instrument by which the property, whatever movable, immovable, is transferred, and in which not otherwise specifically provided by Schedule 1 of the Act. So in any case, when a property is transferred from one person to another in any ways, we call it a conveyance. Legal drafting is crystallization of expression in definitive form of right, legal rights, privileges, function, duty, or status. Now, drafting is something, we can say that drafting is a process and conveyance is the outcome. No, and conveyance is an art of drafting deeds and document whereby the rights, title, or interest in a property is transferred from one person to another. Further, drafting, the concept of drafting is wider than the concept of conveyancing. As I've already told you, that drafting is a very wider term. It includes all, but conveyancing is a narrow than that of drafting. Drafting gives a general meaning and a synonymous to preparation of or drafting of documents. It relates to every document, every deed, and every statute. But conveyancing gives more stress on documentation concerned with the transfer of property from the one person to another. Now, arbitration agreement we are drafting, or service agreement or receipt, everything is being drafted. But sale deed, mortgage deed, gift deed, these all are example of conveyance. Now, let me just tell you what is pleading. See, according to Mogha, pleading are statements in writing drawn up and filed by each party to a case, stating that his contention will be at the trial and giving all such detail at his to his opponent to know in order to put his case in answer. So for an example, I have filed a suit against a person. So I will file a suit, that is also pleading. He will file his defense, that is also pleading. So when both the parties, they are filing their, one person is filing a plaint, other person is filing the defense. So in that case, this is known as pleading. So drafting is a very wider term. It includes conveyance also, it includes pleading also. But conveyance and pleading, they both are narrow terms. Conveyance means when we are transferring any movable or immovable property, and pleading means we are making a reply or we are putting an allegation upon a person in the court. So this is what difference between drafting, conveyance, and pleading is.
Have received. Please explain various stages of civil suits.
See, if we talk about civil suits, there are 14 stages of civil suits. I'll explain you one by one. First of all, it is presentment of plaint. So first of all, any person who is aggrieved or who is suffering from any other person, he will file a plaint. Plaint means you are, see, the word complaint also is derived from the means plaint. No, complaint. Plaint means that you are putting an allegation upon some other person with a view so that court shall take some action against that person. So first of all, any person who is aggrieved, he will file a plaint to the court. Now, immediately, court will serve summons on defendant. He will say that this complaint has been filed against you, and the complaint will be filed to the defendant. And in that case, defendant will give his comments. He will give his defense, that what he want to say in his defense. So what has been filed by the plaintiff has been given to defendant, and what has been received from the defendant will be given to the plaintiff. Once this has been done, then there will be appearance of the parties. Parties will be called upon, and on that particular date, they will be heard and matter will be decided accordingly. It may happen that on the date of appearance, defendant may not have appeared or may not be presented. In that case, court may decide the matter ex parte. Ex parte decree means without the presence of one party. Without the presence of one party. So fifth stage is that it may give an ex parte decree, and if the person are they both are present on the date of hearing, in that case production of document by the parties. So now they have to produce documents. After that there will be examination of parties will be examined. They will be asked that for an example, if somebody has put a allegation on another person, so the lawyers of each party, they will examine the other party. Then there will be framing of issues by the court. Then court will frame some issues, that what are the points of dispute upon which matters should be decided. Then summoning and attendance of the witness. If required, witness can also be called upon, but that is in the later stage, not in the initial stage. In initial stage, only the parties to the suit will be called. Parties to the suit are the defendant and the plaintiff. They will be called. And in later stage, witness will be called. Then we have hearing of the suit and examination of witness. Then the lawyer of both the parties, they will examine the witness. They will ask questions from the witness. After that, there will be arguments. And finally, there will be judgment. Judgment means reasons upon which the decision is taken. And decree means the decision. So first of all, you have to find out what are the reasons upon which decision should be taken and what is the decision. And once the decision has been taken, finally, we will execute that particular decree. So these are the 14 stages in which civil suits are filed. Fine. Kushal.
Next question in the line is, please explain the judicial structure of our country.
Now see, judicial structure of our country, though it is very complex, but still I have tried to put it on, on the board. See, the top most authority in our country is Supreme Court, everybody knows. And Supreme Court is the apex court. Under Supreme Court, we have high courts. So high courts are state-wise and they are the highest court of a particular state. Supreme Court is the highest court of the country. Under high courts, now we have two different types of courts. We have metropolitan courts and district and session courts. See, metropolitan courts are set up in metropolitan areas only. And in other areas, district and session courts are set up. Metropolitan court and district or session court, they are of two types. There can be civil or criminal. Likewise, district and session court are also of two types. It could be civil or criminal. Now, metropolitan, first of all, I'm talking about metropolitan civil court. So it has city council court, which is likewise a district court. Nowadays, we call it district court only, not city council. And then we have the court of smaller causes, or we can call the sub courts, sub district courts. Then we have criminal courts. Then we have a session judge. Then we have chief metropolitan magistrate. The highest authority is the session judge. Under it, we have chief metropolitan courts, and then we have metropolitan magistrate court. So if there is a criminal matter, and they all have different types of, on the basis of jurisdiction, on the basis of, pecuniary limit, and on the basis of the matter, the more serious matter will be taken care of by chief metropolitan magistrate, the more serious matter will be taken care of session judge. So accordingly, they have been given power. Then we have civil court. Now we are talking about district and session courts. In those areas which are not metropolitan areas, in there we do not have metropolitan court, but instead of metropolitan courts, we have districts and session court. So metropolitan courts and district and session courts are one of the same thing. So these are in metropolitan areas, these are in non-metropolitan areas. Districts and civil courts are, there are district court, then we have sub courts, or we can say sub district courts. Then we have principal, junior civil judge court, and then we have Munsif court. So Munsif court are basically are very small courts, and the smallest court in a district, and they are under the district court. They are set up under the district court to just settle the matters. They are not there to decide the matter. So the main intention behind having a Munsif court is that smaller matters should be settled among parties themselves rather than decided by the court. And in criminal, we have session court, then we have judicial magistrate of first class, and we have judicial magistrate of second class. So likewise, we have a judicial structure in our country.
Okay. Yes. Sir, the next question which student have asked is, please explain the essentials of caveat petition.
See, caveat, what is caveat petition? You might have heard of this word in your foundation times also. When we were studying Sale of Goods Act, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. So caveat basically means let the other person beware. So caveat is a Latin term which means let a person beware in law. It may be understood as a notice that certain action may not be taken without informing the person who filed the caveat. So for an example, there are two parties, A and B, and they both either they have dispute, they have already filed suit, or they're going to file suit. Either of the case. Either they have filed a suit or they are going to file suit. Say for an example, they have a dispute on any property, any land. No. In that case, suppose the property is in the possession of B. Now A has an apprehension in his mind that B can sell the property, or he can construct the property, or can dispose of the property in any other manner. So in that case, A can file a caveat petition to the court and can ask for the remedy that nothing can be done upon this land without the permission of A, without the intimation to A, because they have a dispute upon this land. So A has this right to file this caveat petition to the court. Yes or no? So this is what caveat petition is all about. So they say that in Code of Civil Procedure 1908, the provision of lodging caveat petition was inserted under section 148A upon the recommendation of Law Commission of India's 54th report by Civil Procedure Code Amendment Act 104 of 1976. This article is a beginner's guide through the filing of a caveat petition in India. Incorporated under section 148A of Civil Procedure Code 1908, the Indian law defines caveat petition as a precautionary measure taken by a person who hold a strong fear or uneasiness that some or other cause against him or her is going to be filed in the court of law regarding any matter. Caveat is basically a Latin word which means let the person beware. So when can caveat be filed? Caveat can be filed when a person is expected to make an application, or application is already been made, or it is when the proceeding to a suit already instituted, or proceeding to a suit which is going to be instituted. So in all this case, a person who is having an apprehension or fear in his mind that his property can be misused, he can file the caveat petition. Now let's just look at the caveat petition, how this caveat petition is filed. Fine. So In the court of Delhi High Court, application for caveat, section 148A, you have to mention the section also. Money suit number, you have to mention the suit number. That will be done. And in the matter of AB and versus this. So this is the person who is the plaintiff and this is the person who is the defendant. The above named petitioner states that Mr. AB, he is talking about himself, has instituted the above money suit against Mr. PQ and the said suit is pending. So Mr. AB has already filed a suit against Mr. PQ. The summon has not been served on the petitioner as yet, and though he has filed a suit against PQ, but no summon has been served yet. Now what does he want? That as far as the petitioner could know, the said Mr. AB is complainant to file a petition under Order 38 of Civil Procedure Code for attachment of your petitioner's properties before judgment, that your petitioner has every right to appear before the court on the hearing and on application, if any, that your petitioner hereby lodge a caveat to the effect that let nothing be done in the matter of the application under Article 38 through 5 Civil Procedure Code, if any, touching of property petitioner without the notice of the petitioner. So he cannot touch the property without the notice of the petitioner. This is what he has filed. This is, he said, let the other person be there. No. So this is how we file the caveat petition. Next question, sir.
Thank you, sir. So next question is, please differentiate between res judicata and res sub judice.
Now see, res judicata and res sub judice is basically made to avoid the duplicacy of the proceedings, duplicacy of the claims. Or for an example, if one person has filed a suit against other person and such matter is pending in court, then it says that you cannot file the same matter in any other court, because this will only be, duplicacy of the proceeding and nothing else. So it is better that you defend that particular case which has been instituted against you. Res sub judice, in res, the only difference between res judicata and res sub judice is that matter is pending in res sub judice, and in res judicata matter is decided. So if a matter is already been decided by a competent court, you cannot open a fresh matter again in any other court or in the similar court. In that case, you can only file appeal. That is the only remedy which is available to a person. So let us just take what is the difference between both of them. See, res judicata is being defined under section 10, section 11 of CPC. It is defined under section 10. Res judicata is applicable when the matter is already decided, but res sub judice when the matter is pending in the court. Res judicata prevents the trial of a suit or issue in which the matter in issue has already been decided in any previous suit by a competent court. So if any competent court has decided a matter, in that case, you cannot reopen that particular matter. Now you just file appeal against the particular matter. But it barred trial of a suit in which the matter is pending for the decision in the suit. In that case, it says that where a matter is already pending, in that case, you can only defend that particular case and you cannot file a fresh case. Now, what are the conditions? The former suit must have been decided by the court competent to the jurisdiction. The matter in the issue or the subsequent suit must be the same. Both the suit must be between the same parties. The court which decided the former suit must have been court of the competent jurisdiction. Both the parties must have litigated under the same title in the former suit. And what are the conditions of res sub judice? They say that there must be two suits, one previously instituted and other subsequently instituted. The matter in issue is in the subsequent suit must be directly and substantially in the issue of the previous suit, both the suit must be between the same parties. The court in which the previous suit is instituted must have the jurisdiction to try it, and both parties must be litigating under the same title in both the suits. In these cases, there will be prohibition or there will be restriction on the other party to file the similar suit. But there is one exception to res sub judice. What is the exception? Exception is that if there is any foreign proceeding which is going on, which is going against a person, in that case, the same matter can be filed in court because the proceeding is being carried on in a foreign country. So this is the difference between res sub judice and res judicata.
Next question is not related to any topic. It has been asked generally by the students, like how they can get the maximum marks. So, putting forth the next question for you. Please guide how to attempt the explanation-based questions in order to get maximum marks.
See, this question is very wide. There is no specific way of attempting any question, explanation question. So my answer would be that it varies from question to question because it is very difficult to be specific while answering such type of questions. That what is the way of answering the explanation based question? Because in different types of question, you have to answer it differently. You cannot answer it in the same sense, in the same way.
Right.
So this is a very vague question, so very difficult for me to answer.
Okay. So moving towards the next question. Please explain the essentials of arbitration clause and arbitration agreements.
See, when we are talking about arbitration clause and arbitration agreement, we have to understand one thing, that when parties to the contract, they want their matter to be settled by an independent person instead of referring that matter to the court, they can enter into an arbitration agreement. Now, arbitration agreement can be in two forms. It could be in the form of arbitration clause, or it could be in the form of arbitration agreement. Arbitration clause means that, for an example, you have a partnership deed. So in that partnership deed, when you were writing terms and conditions, you have included one condition, that is arbitration. You have put a clause in the deed itself. This is the one way of entering into arbitration. That whenever you are entering into any agreement, in that agreement itself, you can put a clause wherein you can refer your dispute to an independent person instead of moving to the court. The another way of having an arbitration agreement is that you can have a separate agreement. And sir, what is preferable? It depends from parties to parties. It is up to them that if they want to be very specific while having an arbitration agreement, then they must prefer for a separate arbitration agreement. That means in that case, they will execute two agreements. First will be the partnership deed. And another will be the arbitration agreement. So they will have a separate arbitration agreement. What is the purpose of arbitration agreement? They say that having a separate arbitration agreement means that you want to be very specific, that how arbitrator will be appointed, what will be the qualification of arbitrator, how he will function, what will be the rights of arbitrator, what will be the duties of arbitrator. I mean, if you want to be very specific, in that case, you have to draft a separate agreement for arbitration. But if you want to be very generic, you just want to appoint an arbitrator, that's it. So you can have a clause you can have it in the clause also. So first of all, let us just understand what is arbitration. See, what are the essential feature of arbitration agreement defined under section 21B, read with section 7 are as follows. First of all, they say a valid and a binding agreement. There should be a valid and a binding agreement between the parties. And another thing is that such agreement must be in writing only. Oral agreement will not be of any use. Such agreement may be in the form of arbitration clause, as I have told you, or in the form of separate agreement. Another thing is that written agreement. An arbitration agreement shall be in writing. And see, in this clause, what you have to mention in this separate agreement, what will be the, what will be the content of this agreement? They say there is no specific thing as to what will be the content, but your intention to refer your dispute to the arbitration must be clear. So no specific format for clause or agreement but intention to refer matter to arbitration must be clear. So you just have to clearly mention that you want to refer this matter to arbitration, and that is what is required. Now, an arbitration agreement is in writing if it contains the document signed by the parties, a document signed by the parties. So it can be in the form of document, or it can be in exchange of letter, telex, telegrams, or any means of telecommunication which provide a record of agreement. Nowadays, mails are also included. And exchange of statement of claim and defense in which the existence of agreement is alleged by one party and not denied by other party. That means if one party has asked to refer the matter to the arbitration and other party has not denied or not objected to the other party, in that case it will be deemed that there is a written agreement between them to refer matter to the arbitration. And then they say the reference in the contract to the document containing an arbitration clause constitute an arbitration agreement if the contract is in writing and reference instance to make that the arbitration clause part of the contract. Now let us just look upon that how an arbitration agreement is drafted. So I'm showing you the format of arbitration agreement. So they say this agreement is executed on 3rd day of January 2020 at New Delhi between Mr. X and Mr. Y, the first party and the second party. Whereas differences and disputes, now this is the summary. No, differences and dispute have arisen between the parties above mentioned regarding the matter of supply of goods, and parties could not mutually settle the matter, and whereas the parties agreed that the matter be referred to the arbitration to obtain an award. Now this deed witness as under, now these are the terms and conditions of the body. For the purpose of final determination of the dispute, the matter will be referred to Mr. So and so nominated by Mr. So and so, and one party, Mr. nominated by other party as arbitrator and their award. So they are told the process by which they will appoint the arbitrator. If difference should be a reason between the said two arbitrator, the said arbitrator shall select a umpire, and the award to be given by the umpire shall be final. The reasonable time limit may be fixed for proceeding to be carried out by the arbitrator, and the provisions of Arbitrator and Conciliation Act 1996 shall be applicable. Both the parties agreed that they would cooperate and lead evidence, etc. with the arbitrator, and if any of the parties does not cooperate or remain absent, the arbitrator would be at liberty to proceed with the reference ex parte. And further, they have some they say that the reference to arbitration would not revoke by the death of either of the party, and if arbitrator or any of them chosen under this agreement become incapacitated seated either by death or sickness or disability, the parties retain the right to nominating and substituting, and no fresh agreement thereof would be necessary. And it is an express stipulation that any award passed by said arbitrator shall be binding on the parties, and in witness whereof the parties aforesaid have signed this, and this is how the arbitration agreement is prepared. Fine.
Yes.
Question.
Sir, moving to the next question. Please explain the essentials of drafting of special leave petitions.
Now, see, first of all, we have to understand what is a special leave petition. See, what is the meaning of leave? Leave means permission. So, there are certain matters where there is no further appeal lies. In that matter, we can always go to Supreme Court and request under Article 136 that Supreme Court can, if it permits, it can entertain that matter. For an example, there is a dispute between A and B. So they have referred a matter to the court. The court has decided this matter. Now again, they have appealed. As you know that there are two appeals are available against any decree. No. So first appeal and second appeal. A is still not satisfied with the second appeal. Now what he can do? Under Article 136, it says that A can apply to Supreme Court for SLP, special leave petition. Special leave petition means that in that case, if Supreme Court feels that yes, this case must be heard, so it is a residuary power which has been given to the Supreme Court, that where all the appeals is exhausted, all the remedies are exhausted, Supreme Court still has a power to entertain the suit, to entertain the appeal. So this is what special leave petition is. So first of all, before understanding the special leave petition provides aggrieved party a special permission to be heard in apex court. Apex court is the Supreme Court. It is a residual power. Residual power means when it is, first of all, it is the discretion of the Supreme Court whether to entertain that appeal or not, and you cannot compel the Supreme Court to entertain that particular matter. And Supreme Court to be exercised only in case where the substantial portion of law is involved. So you can only exercise this where the substantial portion of law is involved. That means you cannot go on question of fact. In question of fact, it's not allowed. Especially SLP. Article 136 of Constitution of India confers upon the Supreme Court power to grant special leave appeal. Notwithstanding anything contained in this chapter, the Supreme Court may in its discretion grant special leave to appeal from any judgment, decree, determination, sentence or order in any case or matter passed or made by any court or tribunal in the territory of India, and nothing in this clause shall apply to the judgment, determination, sentence or order passed or made by any court of or tribunal constituted by or under the law related to armed forces. So it is not up. This SLP will not apply in armed forces. Fine. So they have their own laws that will be applicable to them. When a High Court refused to issue the request certified under the Article 3, 134A of Constitution of India to enable an aggrieved party to appeal to the Supreme Court against the judgment, order of the sentence awarded by the High Court, the aggrieved party may petition to the Supreme Court for grant of SLP. No? So this is what special leave petition is. Now, how we will draft special leave petition? Let us just look at it. Now, before the Supreme Court of India, because you know that SLP is only against, it is only power given to the Supreme Court. So you can file it against the Supreme Court of India in the matter of ABC Company Limited versus, so he is the petitioner, he is the respondent. Special leave petition under Article 136 of the Constitution of India May it please the Honorable Chief Justice of India and His Lordship, Companion Judge of the Supreme Court, most respectfully showed that the petitioner is a company duly incorporated under the provision of Companies Act, that the petitioner is challenging by way of specially petitioner the judgment and order of the High Court dated so and so, that the petitioner is a real estate company and the respondent has booked a flat with the petitioner, that the property has to be constructed by the petitioner within 8 months and the date of execution of the contract dated so and the respondent had to make the payment in installment as agreed in the contract and full and final payment before the construction was completed. Further, the dispute arose between parties as the respondent failed to pay the balance consideration. The respondent filed a previous FIR before the police, and they aggrieved by the order of magistrate, the petitioner herein preferred the appeal to the session court, where also the petitioner was convicted, and the order of session court was challenged in Honorable High Court. So it was also upheld, and now the petitioner preferred present the SLP, that the aforesaid final judgment of the High Court is challenged on the following grounds. So now you have to tell the grounds upon which you are challenging the decision of High Court, and then what is the relief you have been sought, and it must be followed by the affidavit. Fine. So this is how we have to write special leave petition. So in this case also he has exhausted all his appeal. He has first filed matter to the magistrate, then he has filed appeal to session court, then filed appeal to High Court. So 2 appeals has already been exhausted by him. Now there is no appeal live. So now he has applied to the Supreme Court. So this way you have to make question by yourself, because facts will not be given to you in the question. So you have, until and unless you are not aware of what special leave petition is, it will be very difficult for you to make all these things. So you have to, visualize a case in your mind, and you have to prepare this. So this is how SLP is. Question.
Thank you, sir. So the next question raised is, please explain the Fowler's 5 rule with examples.
See, Fowler's 5 rules are very simple, and he says that if you want to become a good draftsman, you must follow my 5 principles, and you will become a very good draftsman. What is his principle? According to Fowler, anyone who wants to become a good writer should endeavor, before he allows himself to be tempted by more showy qualities, this principle based on following vocabulary. Now, what are 5 principles of Fowler? First principle is, he says that prefer the familiar word to the unfamiliar word. So while drafting, you should write the familiar words instead of writing unfamiliar words. For an example, instead of writing fabricate, you can write build. Instead of writing furnish, you can write give. Instead of writing indeterminate, you can write vague. Instead of writing timid, you can write nervous. Instead of writing accord, you can write agreement. So one must use familiar words instead of using unfamiliar words. Another is that you have to prefer clear words than to create confusions. See, in every language, word is used with a particular intent, and every word must be used with only a particular word. Say, for an example, just take an example of number and amount. Now, amount is a word which should be used with the quantities. That means in which quantities cannot be counted. For an example, money, or information, or time. So we say he has a good amount of money. Where you cannot count the money, you have to say good amount. So amount must be used with such things which is uncountable. But number must be used with which can be counted. For an example, job. For an example, machine. For an example, your sample. So likewise, there are several other words which must be used. So there should be, you should use the clear words. So instead of using amount, if you start using number, it will create confusion. So that should be taken care of. Appropriate word should be used appropriately. Then he said that prefer word which give direct meaning. See, there are in English or in other languages also that there are some idioms or phrases which can be used. So while drafting any document, he says that do not write any idiom, do not use any phrases. For an example, you say he has bigger fish to fry. Now this means that he has bigger things to take care of than what he was talking about now. Or hit the nail on the head to get something exactly right. So instead of writing this indirectly, you should write it directly. One word create problem in giving proper sense of the document, so it should not be used. Now, some people, just to show that how attractive words they can use, they start using uh, I mean Latin words. So these Latin Roman words should not be used in the document because it will give you an uncertainty. For an example, acumen, ability to make good judgment. Atrocity means cruel act. Impecunious means poor. Moribund means near to death. So these types of words should be avoided, which are Latin and should not be used. Finally, we say active voices should be used instead of writing, instead of using passive voices. For an example, they called off the meeting. The meeting was called up. So this is the active voice. So you should use active voice instead of using passive. So these are the 5 main, elements of Fowler, which he says that if anybody follows, he will become a good draftsman.
Okay, sir. So next question line is, please explain the difference between specific power of attorney and general power of attorney.
See, before understanding specific and general power of attorney, we have to understand what is power of attorney. Power of attorney means a document by which you are giving some rights to another person. Now, specific power of attorney, by name it specifies that you are giving only a particular power for a particular time to a particular person. But general power of attorney means you are giving all power to a person for an unlimited time, not and general power of attorney. So first of all, say power of attorney is a legal document that authorizes a person called an agent to act on behalf of a person who created the power of attorney. So there are 2 types of power of attorney: special power of attorney and general power of attorney. Special power of attorney is a power of attorney executed for the purpose of specific act. It is also called particular power of attorney. Specific act meant implies either a specific act or act related to each other. For an example, A creates a power of attorney which would grant B business partner the ability to use certain asset and to take care of the business. And what is the duration? The special power of attorney is to do an act determined, and when that act is done, the power of attorney will come to an end. On the other hand, general power of attorney is power of attorney executed for the purpose of representing the other person performing more than one act. Now, what is the duration of this general power of attorney? It will continue to be in force until expressly revoked or determined by the death of either of the party. So in case of company, the power of attorney executed by the director ceases to be operative as soon as our order of winding up is made and director ceases to function. So this is the basic difference between specific power of attorney and general power.
Okay, sir. So moving to the next question, please explain the difference between interpretation and construction of laws.
See, interpretation means when we are understanding a particular thing in its literal sense. But when we want to understand the intent of a particular thing, then we use the word construction. Let me just give you an example. First of all, what give you a difference. See, interpretation implies the identification of the true sense of statute, whereas construction means drawing inference about the subject that are above the direct expression of the text. You might have heard of literal interpretation. No, literal interpretation. But we say reasonable construction. Yes, sir. Reasonable construction. So that means when you want to understand the purpose or you want to understand the spirit of the law, here you just want to understand the words of the law, what are said literally. So it is the linguistic meaning. Linguistic means you just understanding the language. But it is the legal effect. Legal effect means the intent or the spirit. So interpretation is done when court complies with simple meaning of the legal text. But construction of text exhibit the ambiguous meaning. So whenever there is an ambiguous meaning, court has to decide whether the word used in the legal text cover the case or not. So this is the basic difference between interpretation and construction.
Okay, sir. Next question in line is, please explain the concept and essentials of hire purchase agreement.
See, first of all, we have to understand what hire purchase exactly is. Some students think that hire purchase basically means purchasing something on installment. So no, it is not like that. Let me explain. Let us take an example that there are two persons, A and B. Now he is the vendor and he is the buyer. He wants to purchase a machine. Now this machine costs 1 crore rupees. Now buyer has two options, either to purchase or he can take this machinery on rent. If he takes it on rent, he has to pay a rent of rupees 10 lakh rupees. Or say 1 lakh rupees per month. But if he purchase it, he has to give 1 crore rupees at a time. Now, he has to explore which option is more better. So, for that, he has to understand that for how long he wants this machine. Because if he wants this machine for a very long period, so he must purchase this machine. But if he wants this machine for a very short duration, he can go and take it on rent. But he is not clear about the duration for how long he will be requiring this machine. In that case, he can enter into a hire purchase agreement. What is hire purchase agreement? Hire purchase agreement means an agreement where vendor is giving two options to the buyer. He said that first of all, you just give me a down payment. You take this machinery on rent. No, you take this machinery on rent and give me down payment of say 10 lakh. And afterwards, security, sorry, not down payment, it is security. So you take this on rent and you have to deposit a security of 10 lakh rupees. And every month you need to pay me rent of 1 lakh rupees. and I'm giving you time period of 1 year. Within 1 year, if you make your mind that you want to purchase this machinery, in that case, you can also purchase the machinery. In that case, you don't need to pay me 1 crore rupees, because whatever you have given me security, I will assume it is down payment. And whatever rent you have paid me, I will assume it will be a installment. So what will be the remaining balance that you pay me, and you can purchase it. So in this type of contract, two options are given to buyer. One option is that first option is that you take it on rent and make your mind. I'm giving you time of 1 year or 2 year, whatever what has been agreed among them. In between, if you make your mind, if you want to purchase the machine, you can purchase the machine. And in that case, you don't have to give me the entire amount. Whatever you have paid me as a rent, I will take it. I will also include it in the consideration price. So this way they enter into an agreement. Now there are two types of hire purchase agreement. One between the vendor and buyer, and one between vendor and financer. There are two types of hire purchase agreement. When the owner is unwilling to look to the purchaser of the good to recover the balance price, and the financer who pay the balance undertake the recovery. Now in this case, what is being done? This agreement is between buyer and the financer. Financer has purchased the machinery from the vendor, and it has entered into a hire purchase agreement with buyer. So this is one type of agreement. Another type of agreement is which is directly between buyer and customer. In this form of transaction, goods are purchased by the customer, who is in consideration of executing the hire purchase agreement, and the allied documents remain in possession of the goods, subject to the liability to pay the amount paid by the financer on his behalf. So in second type, it is directly between the customer and the vendor. Fine. Now, stamp duty on hire purchase agreement. See, there is no article governing hire purchase agreement in Schedule 1 in Indian Stamp Act. Such agreement would therefore fall under the general Article 5 regarding the duty. So therefore, hire purchase is liable to stamp under Article 5 of Indian Stamp Act. Registration of hire purchase. They say that registration is optional, and the instrument other than bill which is purchased from cooperative and credit declare, assigned or limit interest or movable property. So therefore, hire purchase agreement or does not require compulsory registration. So stamp duty as per Article 5 and registration is optional. You may or may not get registered. Now let us just take some example of a hire purchase agreement in front of you. So they say that the agreement of hire purchase made on 3rd day of January 2019 between A and B, and thereafter expression and between C and D included the successor of the assigned, the other part. Whereas the owner is engaged in the business of manufacturing. Just give me. Okay. So where the owner is engaged in the business of manufacturing and agreed to let to the hirer, and whereas the hirer has agreed to take or on hire the said goods more particularly described in the Schedule A here too for the terms of 5 years from the date of execution of this agreement. Now this deed witness as under. So now there are terms and conditions of this hire purchase agreement. So this is how a hire purchase agreement is being made. So what is agreed among the parties? The agreement is that initially you take this as a machinery, you can also purchase this machinery. So because two options are granted, that is why the agreement is known as hire purchase agreement. Fine. So they have a separate act of hire purchase through which this entire agreement is governed. You can take screenshots so that you can take reference later.
Okay, sir. So shall I move to the next question?
Yes, sir.
Uh, the next question, sir, is please explain the difference between lease and license.
Okay. See, license, see, when we say license, that means we are only giving specific right to a person over a property. But when we say lease, in lease, we means except selling the property, we are giving all the rights to the other person. So lease is giving more rights, but license is very specific and very generic. Now, what is difference between lease and license? License is granted by one person to another or to a definite number of person a right to do or continue to do or upon the immovable property of the grantor something which would in absence of such right be unlawful, and such right does not amount to an easement or an interest in property. The right is called license. For an example, if say for an example, I have a parking, I have a house, and therein I have a lot of space for parking. So I can grant a license to my neighbor that you can also park your car here. So he is not the owner of that particular property, or I'm not giving that property to him on rent. I'm just giving him a license to use that property in a particular way. So this is what license is. But lease of immovable property is a transfer of right to enjoy such property made for a certain time, expressed or implied, or in perpetuity in consideration of a price paid or promised and money shared and money shared uh, a share of corpus, service or any other thing or value to be rendered periodically or on specific occasion to transferor by the transferee who accept the transfer of such terms. So like lease means I'm giving you the right to enjoy this property in any way you want. You cannot sell this particular property, otherwise you can do anything. And this lease is for the consideration. Now, license is governed by Indian Easement Act 1882, but it is governed by Transfer of Properties Act 1882. The parties called the licensor and the licensee, they are called lessor and the lessee. No interest is created in license, interest is created in case of lessee. So here interest is created, no interest is created in licensee. Licensee do not have any interest. He can only enjoy the property in a particular way, what has been said by the licensor. So licensee cannot assign it, but these are generally assignable. Assignable means if I want to give that, for an example, I have taken a property on lease. Now, can I sublease that property? Until and unless it is not restricted, I can sublease the property. Always permissive and recoverable and not normally recoverable. So for an example, if you want to terminate the license, you can terminate the license anytime. You just need to pay the loss which has been incurred by the licensee, and you can terminate the license. But in case of lease, you cannot terminate the lease. So you cannot recover the property until the lease is not expired. So not exclusive user, he cannot use all the he cannot enjoy all the rights, and he is the exclusive user. Exclusive user means he can enjoy all the rights and exclusive. Finally, further he says remedy of breach is damage. Here specific enforcement can be made. Say for an example, I have executed a license agreement between you and I deny to give my property to you. In that case, you cannot ask me specifically. You can only ask me damages. But in case of lease, you can ask special relief also and damages also. Instrument granting right does not require registration, but here registration is mandatory. Under user not liable for public nuisance, here he is liable for public nuisance. Denial of grantor title does not necessarily result in forfeiture, and denial of lesser's title result in forfeiture. That means uh, if the grantor title is denied, in that case licensee will not be given the property. But in that case, if the lesser's title is denied, so in that case property can be forfeited. No notice necessary for termination of relationship. That means if licensor want to terminate the license anytime, he do not want to give any notice. But here you have to give the notice for termination of relationship, and it does not entitle licensee to use strangers in his own name, can sue in his own name. So does not entitle licensee to sue stranger in his own name. So for an example, if any person other than licensee is using that property, licensee cannot sue. Only the owner has power to sue the other party. But if in case of lease, if the property has been taken by the lessee can file suit in his own name. He do not have to ask the lessor to file the suit. So this is the basic difference between these. Thanks.
Okay, sir. Moving to the next question. This is, what is deed of assignment?
See, assignment essentially means transfer. But we use this term when rights are transferred. Actually, word transfer cannot be used with rights. When the rights are transferred from one person to another, we cannot say it is a transfer of right. No, we say it is assignment. That means when one person is giving his right to another person, then we say that this is an assignment. So now how assignment actually happens? Say for an example, there are two persons, A and B. They enter into a contract. Fine. Suppose he has a land and he has asked a builder to build his house on the land. So who was party to contract? A and B. No. In that case, it may happen that B is unable to fulfill the obligation, and with the mutual consent, B says that I am transferring my all rights and obligation in this contract to a person C. He is also a builder. Now he will build house for you instead of me. So what he is doing, he is substituting himself. No. So for that, he need to enter into an agreement. We call it deed of assignment between B and C. Wherein what will happen? B will transfer all his obligation, rights and obligation to C under this contract. So assignment is slightly different from outright transfer. An assignment occurs when two parties are in a contractual relationship and one party wants to give all his contractual rights to third party and entirely remove himself from the contract. The new party, known as assignee, effectively replace the old contracting party, taking on not only his right under the contract but also his obligation as well. Typically, unless the original contract states otherwise, both parties to the original contract must approve an assignment before it takes place. So now you understand what is the meaning of assignment. Assignment means when one person is giving all his rights and obligation in a contract to another person. So this is a contract of assignment made on so where the assigner is the proprietor of the trademark. Acha. Patent, trademark, copyright, because these are also in the form of rights. So you cannot, I mean, transfer this. So if one person he has taken patent on a particular I mean, scientific research or a device. So he wants to transfer that patent to some other person. So he has to make an assignment deed. So this is an assignment deed for assignment of a trademark, because you are transferring a right, and right cannot be transferred. I've told you, right can only be assigned. So now thereof, in pursuance of this agreement and in consideration of the payment of so and so and other good and valuable consideration, the receipt and sufficiently of which is hereby acknowledged, assigner hereby conveys, transfer, assign, deliver, and contribute to assignee all assigners' right, title, and interest by whatever kind in and a trademark together with the goodwill of the business relating to the product service in respect upon which the trademark are used and for which they are registered. All income royalties, all income royalties and damages hereinafter due or payable to assigner with respect to the trademark, including but without limitation damages and payment of the past or future infringements and misappropriation of the trademark. All rights to sue for the past, present, and future infringement, misappropriation of the trademark. The assigner confirm that no dispute in respect of a trademark is pending. The assigner and the assignee confirm that there is remittance of funds outside India in connection with the assignment. The assigner further covenants that the request of the assignee, it will execute all documents, paper forms, and authorization that may be necessary for securing completion or vesting of the assignee full right, title, and interest trademark, and covering law in case any dispute in respect of agreement would be of dash India. In witness whereof, the common seal of the parties hereinafter fixed on dash day hereinafter mentioned above. Now assigner and assignee, the both will say. So this is what is the deed of assignment.
Okay, sir. Moving to the next question. Please explain the rules of pleadings.
Now, we have already discussed pleading in, I guess, question number 2, where we have stated difference between drafting, conveyance, and pleading. Now, as per Mogha, pleading are statement in writing drawn up and filed by each party to a case stating that his contentions will be at the trial and giving all such detail as the opponent needs to know in order to prepare his case in answer. So in case, so for an example, A has filed a case against B. So whatever he has said in that particular case will be supplied to B, and B will give defense, and that will be provided to A, so that they should be prepared in their case that what the other party is saying. So pleading is basically, pleading contain claims by plaintiff, counterclaim by defendant, questions and answers, and everything that is essential to lead the case to a certain end. Any ground or fact not mentioned in the pleading cannot be used or relied upon by the parties in the court during the judicial proceeding. So whatever you have to say in the pleading itself. Pleading means whatever you want to say, you have to say it initially. Later on, you just need to prove that whatever is said in advance. Otherwise, case will never be solved. So whatever you have in your mind, you should be very clear of while pleading. So while making your plead, you should be very careful. Order 6, Rule 2.1 state that every pleading shall contain only a statement in a concise form of the material fact on which the party pleading relies for his claim or defense, or as the case may be, but not the evidence by which they are going to prove it. Thus, the provision indicate that 4 basics or fundamental rules of documents
are pleading. The pleading ought to state the facts of the case and not the legal provision. Pleading must contain only the material facts. Pleading should contain the relevant facts and on which the either party relies. And pleading must contain the concise, that is the brief fact that explain the details of the case. So this is what you have to take care of while deciding, while pleading.
Moving to the next question. Hello?
Ji sir.
So next, shall I move to the next question?
Yes sir, yes.
Sir, please explain the differentiation between plain and written statement.
See, plaint is basically a document stating the cause of action, but defense statement or the written statement containing all material facts and other detail, it is called the written statement. So plaint is basically filed by the plaintiff and written statement is, or the defense statement is filed by the defendant. So plaint is filed by plaintiff and written statement is filed by the defendant. The plaint is the first stage. The defendant is required to give the defense within 30 days of date of receipt of copy of plaint. The plaint is usually divided into parts such as heading, cause title, body, prayer, signature. But general denial of grounds alleged in the plaint is not sufficient and denial has to be specific and must be substantiate. Plaint should contain the name and description of the resident of the defendant. Every allegation on the fact of the plaint is not denied specifically or by necessary implication stating the admitting the plaint. So what is difference between plaint and written statement? It is very clear that plaint is basically the complaint filed by the plaintiff or the actual case, and defense is basically the answers to the plaint. So if you want to deny any particular clause of the plaint, you have to give the reasons that upon what reason you are denying that particular claim. So it is now then up to the plaintiff to prove the facts. It is not up to the defendant. So defendant can simply deny it by giving the reasons. Now it will become the duty of the plaintiff to prove it in the later stage. Sir.
Okay, sir. Sir, one question, the last second question from you is, what are the execution petitions?
See, execution petitions are basically petitions which are filed to execute the decree which has already been given by the court. So sometime the court has given a decree or the decision, but it has not been executed due to any reason. So in that case, the person in whose favor that decree has been filed, he can go to move to the court and can file the execution petition. So word execution is not defined under civil code. It simply means the process of enforcing the decree that is passed in the favor of the decree holder by the competent court. So as per rule 2E of civil rules, of practice, execution petition means a petition to the court for execution of decree of the order, and execution application means application to the court made in a pending execution petition include application for transfer of a decree. So if you have already filed an execution petition and still that matter is not executed, in that case you have to file an execution application. And remember that if the decision of the court is not executed, the person who is refraining from executing that particular complaint will be held contempt of court, guilty of contempt of court. Yes sir.
Okay, sir. So the next question in the line is, in copyright registration procedure.
Okay. Now see, first of all, understanding what the copyright is. Copyright is basically the ownership copyright ownership gives the owner the exclusive right to use the work, with some exceptions when a person creates the original work fixed in the tangible medium, and he and she automatically owns the copyright to the work. Now, the question is, what kind of work can be registered under copyright? So you can register musical work, literary work, cinematographic, fashion designing, artistic work, performances, software. But these things cannot be copyrighted. What? Titles, names, ideas, concept, slogans, method, short phrases, because upon this trademark can be given, no? Further, why do we need a copyright? See, copyright registration create a public record, and it tells the world that your work is protected by the copyright, and also enables a person who wants to license the work to find. It enables to file a lawsuit that take legal action against someone who infringes your copyright. It provides with the economic benefit of entitling you to use the work in various ways. It allows you to sell or pass the right. It allows you to get legal evidence of your ownership. It allows you to change the form of your work. For example, you want to allow to make a sequel or revise or update the work, so you can do it. So this is, in this way, you need a copyright. Now, what is a okay. Who can register the copyright? Fine. So there are three persons who can get it registered. First is the author. Author means either the person who actually created the work, or if the work is made during the employment, in that case the employer will be the author. The copyright claimant. The copyright claimant can be the author, or a person or an organization that has obtained ownership or right from an author. And the authorized agent. Authorized agent means authorized agent of an author, of claimant, or owner of exclusive right. So these three persons, they can go and can take copyright. Fine. It must be mentioned here that there is no age bar of getting a copyright, and a minor is also entitled to register a copyright. This is because copyright law recognizes creativity and understand the age cannot be the restriction on creativity. Fine. Now, what are the essential documents that are required for copyright registration? You need to give 3 copies of work that is published. If the work is not published, then 2 copies of manuscript. Manuscript means manual. Manuals means it could be handwritten or manually written. If application is being filed by an attorney, then special power of attorney. See, attorney means that, for an example, you might be aware of writing a book, but you may not be able to get it copyrighted. So you have hired a lawyer, or you may have hired a company secretary to get a copyright register. So you have to write a wakalatnama, or we can say special power of attorney in favor of that particular person. And authorization in respect of work, if the work is not work of the applicant. See, if it is not your work, in that case you must also show the authorization of the person whose original work it was. Information regarding the title, language of the work, information regarding the name, address, and nationality of the applicant. Applicant must also provide his mobile number and email address. If the applicant is not the author, the document containing the name, address, and nationality of the author. And if the author is deceased, the date of the death and the death certificate. If the work is to be used on a product, then non-objectionable certificate from the trademark office is required. If the applicant is other than the author, no objection certificate from the author. If the person photo is appearing on the work, no objection certificate from such person. In case the publisher is not the applicant, no objection from the publisher. The work is published, the year, the address of the first publication, and it is also required. The information regarding the year and the country of subsequent publication. In case of copyright is for the software, the code and other things has to be required. These all things you need to be submit while filing your copyright application. Now, what is the procedure? The procedure is 3 steps. First step is you have to file the application. Who can file the application? The author, the claimant, or the owner of the exclusive right, or the authorized agent. You have two options. Either you can file it physically, or you can file through e-facility. Now you have copyright.gov.in. And for registration of each work, a separate application must be given. So for an example, you have two work, so you have to give it two separate application. One application for two works cannot be given. Further, the examination. Once the diary number is issued, the minimum 30 days waiting period in this time period, and copyright examiner reviews the application, and this waiting period exists, so the objection are arise and review. And in case the objection are raised, in that case, the author of the copyright is to be asked to answer the objection. If there is no objection, then they will move to the third step. And the third step is registration, the final step. That is, once the copyright registrar of copyright is satisfied that everything has been taken care of and all the documents are full and final, so he will grant the copyright certificate, and he will register the details in his register and grant the certificate. The process of registration of copyright completes when the applicant is issued with the extract of register and the certificate. So this is the procedure of registration of copyright.
Thank you.
Over to you, Kushalji.
Thank you, Simranjit sir.
Most welcome, sir.
We have received a few more questions, 2-3 questions that I'll take my pleasure to answer those questions.
Sure.
So starting with, do old syllabus students need to study from new syllabus module because they are number of topics added in the new syllabus module? Kindly guide and please ensure the paper would be formed on the old module itself. The module student need to study only from the old modules. They need not to refer to the new module because the syllabus is old for you. So the applicable module only you will study. The second questions which we have received in the chat box is, sir, what are the points which the paper checker expert in our answer sheet basis on which marks are allotted? There is no as such answer for this question. Straight jacketed answer cannot be given, but still I would like to share the examiner's observations with you in this respect so that you can take a hint out of it, like how to write a good question. So sharing it with you. So first of all, read the question well and try to understand what is asked by the examiners. Many students fail to do so. Write answer to the point. Keep your handwriting legible. Do not give extra time to a single question because time will be taken from the other questions in this case. Quote the relevant provision cases to support your answer. Do not try to quote the wrong cases at all. If you do not know the provision, do not quote a wrong case law or provision. Do not try to stretch the answer unnecessarily. More observations. The student should practice drafting of commercial agreements and applications under Civil Procedure Code and Criminal Procedure Code. Many students are not able to draft the writ of quo warranto. So please, in the last attempt, many students could not answer that drafting of writs of quo warranto. Please practice drafting these writs. In-depth study of application for caveat under section 148 CPC is required. Students shall cite landmark cases of high courts and supreme courts. Please read suggested answers. Students shall give more emphasizing on drafting. In-depth study of indigent person is required. In-depth study of appellate authorities under Competition Act is required. So these are the basic observations which the examiners have given. So you need to take care of all these observations. And the last question which I have received is, sir, can we get the recording of this session? Of course, we'll try to do it. We'll try to make it available for you, the video recording of this session. So we conclude this session. Now we are complete with the questions, and I would like to extend a vote of thanks to Sir Simranjit sir. We express our sincere thanks and gratefulness to CS Simranjit Singh for sparing his valuable time to address the participant of this program and for his words of wisdom, which will go a long way in understanding the nuances of drafting, appearances, and feeding and attempting the examination. Friend, the next session in the series is scheduled on 27th April 2021 Tuesday. So do log in and send your queries in advance. Thank you. Thank you, Simranjit sir.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.